Turning 60 wasn't something I looked forward to. I didn't dread it either. I'm not the sentimental type, but I assumed it would pass like any other milestone in my life. Quietly, responsibly, without too much fuss. I thought my wife, Lynn, might organize a small gathering, maybe invite the kids and a few old friends from church. That's exactly what she did. Our backyard had folding chairs and string lights, sandwiches from the local deli, and a big white cake with Happy 60th, James, written in blue icing. People smiled, handed me envelopes with gift cards, patted my back like I'd just crossed some finish line I didn't even know I'd been running toward. I stood there with a paper plate in one hand, a warm beer in the other, and tried to make myself feel grateful, but there was something hollow in the air, like the smile everyone was wearing wasn't meant for me. The moment that turned the air cold came after the cake, when Lynn tapped her glass and said, "All right, everyone, our daughter, Elise, wants to say a few words about her father." I was surprised. Elise never struck me as the type to speak in public, especially not for me. She stood by the deck, holding a small note card in her hands. Her voice trembled at first, and I thought maybe she was emotional. I thought maybe I'd done better than I thought. Maybe they did notice all those late nights, all the birthdays I worked through so they could have what I never did. But then she said it, word for word. "Dad, I wish you weren't here today. Not because I hate you, but because it would have been easier to remember you as a good man if you just disappeared. You were never really here for us anyway." A few people gasped. One of Lynn's cousins choked on her wine. My ears rang. My smile froze. And the backyard fell into the kind of silence that makes even the trees feel like they're holding their breath. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My mouth went dry, and for a second I wondered if I was dreaming. If maybe I'd had too much to drink and passed out. And this was one of those bizarre nightmares that make no sense when you wake up. But I was awake. And my son, Jordan, stepped forward and added fuel to the fire without missing a beat. "Only Mom loves us," he said. "She gave us everything. She's the only one who ever cared." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look angry. He just looked settled, like he'd carried this belief for years, and now was finally allowed to speak it out loud. My heart didn't just break. It collapsed inward, like a house eaten away by termites. Quiet damage, unnoticed until it's too late. I stared at Lynn. She stood there, chin high, lips pressed together like she was holding back tears or satisfaction. And right then, I knew. I didn't have the full story yet, but something in my gut told me the truth had been twisted long before that cake hit the table. I sat down after that, not because I wanted to, but because my knees started shaking. I watched the guests glance around awkwardly, pretending to talk about the weather or their plans for the weekend. Anything to avoid the storm that had just passed through our celebration. Some offered me a sympathetic look. Most didn't. Lynn didn't come over to me. She didn't say a word. She just continued chatting with her sister like nothing had happened. I thought back to all those years I worked double shifts so the kids could go to a better school, the times I skipped vacations so we could keep up with mortgage payments, the nights I came home to cold dinner and silence, telling myself it was just the price of being a good provider. I believed that if I kept showing up, if the bills were paid and the roof didn't leak and they had shoes that fit and food in the fridge, then I was doing my job as a father. I didn't realize someone else had been rewriting the definition of that job behind my back. When the guests finally left and the lights dimmed, I asked Lynn to sit with me. Just the two of us. No smiles. No guests. No distractions. What was that? I asked her, my voice low and steady, trying not to sound like a man unraveling. "What have you been telling them?" She tilted her head, that same look she used to give me when I misplaced the car keys or forgot to pick up milk. Mild irritation, veiled with pity. "I didn't tell them anything they didn't see for themselves," she said. "You were never around. I just filled in the gaps." I stared at her, stunned. Filled in the gaps. I echoed. I was working. For us. Everything we have, everything they have. It came from the hours I poured into that job. She shrugged. "Maybe. But they don't remember that. They remember who sat through their tears. Who took them to doctor appointments. Who made their Halloween costumes." I opened my mouth to argue, but she was already walking away. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my home office, digging through drawers, pulling out old receipts, tuition bills, payment statements, paper proof of my presence. If they couldn't see the father I'd been, then I would show them. I looked at photos, birthdays, graduations, recitals, realizing how often I was behind the camera, not in the frame. I remembered missing Elise's second-grade play because of a busted pipe at work. I remembered Jordan's soccer final that I arrived at 5 minutes late. I remembered all the sacrifices I made in the name of love, never realizing that someone was quietly redefining what love should look like in my absence. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just tired. I was angry. The next morning, I didn't greet Lynn with a good morning, didn't ask if she wanted coffee or what she had planned for the day. I just watched her move through the kitchen like she hadn't detonated a bomb in our family the night before. Her robe trailed behind her. She buttered toast, checked her phone, sipped from a floral mug that said, "World's Best Mom." And for the first time, I actually read the words like they meant something. They weren't just a cute novelty anymore. They were a declaration, a crown she wore proudly while I was left with whatever scraps of fatherhood she hadn't already claimed. I set the folder of receipts on the kitchen table. She didn't flinch, just looked up, one eyebrow raised. "What's this?" she asked, as though I hadn't spent the entire night digging through physical proof of my love. "It's what they said I never did," I replied, staring right at her. "It's every tuition payment, every emergency expense, every single thing I paid for while you acted like I was invisible." She didn't even reach for the folder. Instead, she leaned back in her chair like I'd just handed her a conspiracy theory pamphlet, something wild and unworthy of acknowledgement. "James, you're not going to fix this with paperwork," she said with a casual sort of cruelty, like the truth was no longer mine to defend. "They don't remember what's in there. They remember who was present. Emotionally, not financially." I laughed. I actually laughed, though nothing about it was funny. "You mean to tell me that all the sacrifices I made, missing dinners, working through holidays, all the overtime I did so they could go to private school and never worry about rent, that means nothing now because you were the one who sat next to them on the couch?" Her silence wasn't just infuriating, it was revealing. She wasn't surprised. She wasn't confused. She knew exactly what she'd done. She'd let them build a story where I was absent, distant, cold, and she never corrected it. "You let them believe I didn't care," I said, voice lower now, not from calm, but from something darker, resignation. "You let them think I chose work over them, when all I ever did was work for them." Her expression didn't change. "I didn't have to say anything, James. They came to their own conclusions." That line hit me harder than Elise's toast or Jordan's cold delivery. Because it wasn't just a denial. It was a proud declaration that she had watched our children rewrite me out of their memories and had done absolutely nothing to stop it. Worse, she'd probably shaped it. Not directly, not with lies, but with absences, with omissions, with that tired sigh every time they asked where Dad was, with the way she framed everything as "Mom took care of it," until the idea of me being involved sounded like fiction to them. I left the kitchen before I said something I'd regret. But even as I climbed the stairs, I realized that regret was already pouring in. Not for what I might say, but for what I hadn't said all these years. I had trusted her, naively, perhaps, but fully, to share the truth of our partnership with our kids. I thought we were a team. I thought she understood that my long hours, my distance, were in service of our future. I thought love could be measured in roof shingles and light bills, in college funds and grocery runs. But love, it turns out, is only love when someone narrates it for you. And she had edited me out of the story like I was just a footnote in their lives. Not a father, not even a man, just a paycheck with a name they barely respected. That afternoon, I sat in my office and started drafting an email to both Elise and Jordan. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to defend myself with bitterness or guilt trips. I was going to give them facts. I attached PDFs of tuition statements, rental assistance during Jordan's college years, Elise's car payment when she lost her job for 6 months, even the monthly allowance I kept sending long after they stopped calling. I included a short note. "This is not about proving I was perfect. It's about showing you I was there, in the only way I knew how to be, because that was the role I believed I was allowed to play." I hovered over the send button for a long time. My finger trembled. I felt pathetic, really, 60 years old, and still begging my own children to see me clearly. But in that moment, I needed them to know. If nothing else, I needed the truth to live somewhere outside my own damn head. Later that evening, a reply from Elise came in. Just one sentence. Why are you doing this now? I didn't know how to answer. Because the lie finally has a face. Because I spent decades building a life only to realize someone else told the story of it. Because I'm tired of being the villain in a narrative I didn't write. But I didn't write any of that. I just closed the laptop and stared out the window. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that settles in after a bomb drops and everyone's too stunned to speak. Lynn didn't talk to me that night. She moved around the house like a ghost, her slippers barely making a sound. And maybe that was who she'd become to me now, someone I used to know. Someone who used to believe in us before she decided to go solo and take the kids with her. The next day, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my younger brother, Marcus. He's the only one who ever saw me clearly, the one who used to joke that I was married to my job and side chick parenting. When I told him what happened at the party, he didn't sound shocked. James, he said, you always thought loyalty meant silence. But sometimes silence just gives people room to lie louder. That hit me in the chest. Hard. He wasn't being cruel. He was just calling it like he saw it. You showed up with money. She showed up with hugs. They picked her because emotions make better memories than bills. But that doesn't mean what you did doesn't matter. I sat with that for a long time after we hung up. By the end of the week, Jordan still hadn't replied to my message. Elise sent a longer email, questioning some of the dates, asking why she didn't remember some of the things I claimed to have done. I told her memories don't always play fair. Sometimes they cling to feelings, not facts. And if she never felt my love, then I had to own that too. But that didn't mean I wasn't there. And I wasn't going to let my absence be defined solely by emotion when the evidence of my presence was stacked in folders across my desk. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just trying to be heard. I was demanding it. It was a Saturday when I called them both, Elise and Jordan. I didn't ask Lynn for permission, didn't run it by her like I used to when we were still pretending we were a team. I just told the kids to come by the house, separately if they had to, but I needed 1 hour. Just one. No birthday cake. No performance. No passive-aggressive glances across the room. Elise hesitated, said she had plans but would stop by. Jordan's response was blunt. If it's about guilt, don't bother. I didn't answer right away. Then I wrote back. It's about truth. You can decide for yourself if that's worth hearing. Maybe it was the tone. Maybe it was the fact that I'd never asked them for anything without also offering something in return. Either way, they both showed up that afternoon. They came in separately, didn't speak to each other, but sat across from me at the dining table like they were waiting for a lecture they'd already decided not to believe. I didn't bring out the folder right away. I looked at them, really looked at them, both grown now, living their own lives, shaped by a version of our family I never signed off on. Elise looked uncomfortable, arms crossed like a shield across her chest, her expression tight, but not angry. Jordan looked detached, like he had already mentally checked out before I'd even started. I'm not here to change how you feel about me, I said, my voice steady but heavier than usual. But I am here to make sure you have all the information you were never given. Elise shifted in her chair. Jordan sighed, but didn't interrupt. I slid the folder across the table and opened it, laying out the receipts like I was building a timeline. Tuition payments, rent subsidies, utility bills, insurance records, birthday party deposits, even Elise's therapy sessions. I'd paid for those too, silently, without asking for thanks, just wanting her to be okay. Elise leaned forward first. She picked up one of the documents, then another. Her eyes scanned the pages, her fingers trembling slightly as she flipped through dates and dollar signs that didn't match the narrative she had been sold. I don't remember any of this, she muttered, almost to herself. Jordan didn't move. He just stared at me, arms folded, a wall built so high I wasn't sure anything could get through. Why now, he asked. Why after all these years? I looked at him, not with anger, but with something else, something that sat deeper. Because I let someone else tell you who I was, I said. And that's on me. But now you're adults, and you deserve to know the full story. Not just the one your mother curated. He scoffed, shook his head. You mean the one where you weren't there? I took a breath, knowing this was the moment that would either begin to shift things or solidify them forever. I was there, Jordan, just not in the way you understood. I worked myself sick to keep this house running. I didn't hug as much as I should have. I didn't say the right words, but every single thing I did was for this family. And while I was out there trying to hold everything together, someone else made it seem like I didn't care. Elise put the papers down, her eyes glossy now. She never said you didn't pay, she whispered. She just didn't say you did. That small sentence cracked something open in me. How simple it had been to erase me. Not with lies, but with silence. I turned to her, trying to contain the emotion rising in my throat. You don't need to remember every check I wrote, but I need you to understand I was never absent out of choice. I thought I was doing what was right, and I thought your mother was telling you the rest of the story. Jordan finally stood up. So what? You want credit now? He said sharply. You think this makes up for everything? I didn't flinch. No, I replied. I just want the truth to have a place at the table. He stared at me, jaw clenched, the same way I used to stare at my own father when I thought he didn't understand me. It hit me then how generational this distance had become. Fathers trying to provide, sons needing something softer, and no one ever translating between the two. Elise stood too. I need time, she said quietly. This changes things, but I need to sit with it. I nodded. Take all the time you need, I said. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for clarity. Jordan didn't say anything else. He just walked out. Elise lingered for a moment, her hand hovering over the folder before pulling it closer to her chest. She didn't hug me. She didn't say thank you. But she didn't look through me the way she had at the party, and for now, that was enough. Lynn came home just after they left. She noticed the cleared table and the missing folder immediately. You called them? She asked. Yes, I said plainly. They deserve to hear my side. She didn't respond, just stared at me, then down at the floor. You're heartless, she finally muttered. I laughed bitterly. No, I just stopped pretending I didn't matter. She shook her head, went upstairs, and didn't come back down for the rest of the night. That silence, the one I used to mistake for peace, now felt like surrender. I wasn't trying to win anymore. I just wanted to stop losing who I was in this marriage, this family, this damn narrative she'd been scripting for decades. For once, I had said what needed to be said. And whether they hated me or not, at least now they hated me for the truth. Later that night, Marcus called. I told him everything. He didn't say, I told you so, though I know he wanted to. He just said, you did the right thing. Now let the pieces fall where they may. I sat in the dark afterward, listening to the creaks in the walls of a house I'd paid for, maintained, and grown old in, but had never truly been seen in. I thought about the years I had left, and whether any of them would be spent being known for who I really was, instead of who I wasn't. And for the first time in decades, I realized that speaking the truth out loud might be the only way to finally feel free. In the weeks that followed that sit-down with Elise and Jordan, the house felt like a museum of everything we had once called a life. Quiet, decorated, but hollow. Lynn and I barely spoke. We passed each other like strangers in a shared rental, not a couple who had built nearly 4 decades of memories together. I no longer tried to reach her. I'd spent too many years trying to fit into the emotional corners she carved out just for herself and the kids. Now, I stood still and let the silence do what it needed to do. Every morning, I woke up to the same dull ache, a reminder that I had spent most of my adult life being misunderstood by the people I thought I was saving. And still, part of me held out hope that now, maybe, things could start to bend in a different direction. Not back to how they were, but somewhere more honest. Elise called first. It was 2 weeks after our conversation, and her voice was quieter than I remembered it being. Can I ask you something? She said. Of course, I replied, already bracing myself for whatever might come next. Did you ever resent us? She asked. For not noticing? I paused, not because I didn't have an answer, but because I didn't want to give her the wrong version of the truth. I never resented you, I said slowly, but I did feel invisible, and I blamed myself for that for a long time. Thought maybe I just wasn't the kind of father who left a mark. But then I realized, people only remember what they're told, and you were told a version of me that didn't exist. She was quiet on the other end. Then she said something that lodged itself in my chest like a thorn. Mom made it sound like you were only ever there when it was convenient. I leaned back in my chair, eyes closed. Convenience doesn't drive a man to spend 30 years putting everyone else first, I whispered. But I see how easy it was to believe that when no one else told you otherwise. After that call, something shifted. Elise didn't call every day, but when she did, it wasn't out of obligation, it was curiosity. She started asking questions, wanting to know more about who I was outside of the man who came home late and paid the bills. She wanted to know what I gave up, what I had hoped for, who I used to be before I turned into the ghost of her memories. It hurt to realize how much of me she had never seen, but it also felt like breathing for the first time in years. I told her about my college dreams, how I gave up architecture school to take over my dad's contracting business when he fell ill. I told her how I wanted to write, once. Short stories, essays. But dreams didn't pay for braces or school supplies, so I shelved them. She listened, really listened, and I could hear something cracking open in her, the idea that her father was more than just a background figure. But Jordan remained silent, and that silence stung in a way I couldn't explain. With Elise, I saw an opening. With him, it was a closed door, nailed shut. I knew he had always been closer to Lynn. He inherited her sharpness, her ability to weaponize silence. But I had hoped that maybe, just maybe, the truth would stir something in him. Instead, he posted a cryptic Facebook status 2 days after our meeting. Funny how people think money can buy them a relationship they never built. I didn't respond, though every cell in my body burned to defend myself. I knew that no comment, no clarification would undo the version of me that Lynn had planted in him. The kind that says love is only real if it's loud and visible, not if it shows up every month in the form of school fees and fixed roofs. It didn't take long for Lynn to catch wind of Elise calling me more. She never said it outright, but I noticed the shift. One night, I overheard her on the phone with her sister, saying things like, "He's just trying to manipulate them now that he's old and scared of dying alone." I stood outside the door, her words wrapping around my throat like wire. That's how she saw me, a desperate man grasping for relevance. I should have known then that the person I married was long gone, if she ever existed at all. The next morning, I packed a bag. Not all my things, just enough to leave. "Where are you going?" she asked, arms crossed, as if daring me to make a move. "Somewhere I can breathe," I replied. "I'm tired of living in a house where I have to prove I exist." I moved in with Marcus temporarily. His guest room was small, but the space felt expansive compared to the emotional coffin I'd been living in. We'd sit out on the porch some nights, talking about the past, the future, and all the things we never said to each other growing up. Marcus told me something that stuck. "You spent your life building a house and forgot to build a story. Lynn built the story. That's why she won, at least until now." It was true. I thought bricks and beams were enough. I thought effort spoke for itself. But effort without narrative becomes invisible. I had given my family the skeleton. Lynn gave them the heart, even if she rewrote the anatomy. Still, I didn't want to be the man who lived bitter. I started journaling, not just about what happened, but about who I was before it all got so twisted. I wrote about falling in love with Lynn before the walls went up. I wrote about holding Elise for the first time, terrified but certain. I wrote about Jordan's first Little League game and how I cheered so loud I lost my voice. These weren't just memories. They were anchors, evidence that I had lived fully, even if no one remembered it that way. And maybe one day, I'd leave those journals behind, not for validation, but as proof that I was never absent, just unsung. Then one night, Elise asked if we could meet for coffee. In person. It was awkward at first. She stirred her latte like it held answers. I watched her eyes dart between me and the table. "You know," she finally said. "I asked Mom why she never told us about the money. About everything you did." I leaned in. "What did she say?" Elise looked up, her expression a mix of hurt and clarity. "She said she didn't think it mattered. That what mattered was how we felt, not what you did." I swallowed hard. "And what do you think?" I asked. Elise paused. "I think feelings lie sometimes, especially when they're fed the wrong story." That was the first time I cried in front of my daughter. Not big, dramatic sobs, just quiet tears that I let fall because they finally had a place to land. And she didn't flinch. She just reached across the table and held my hand. Word spreads in families faster than truth ever can. A week after Elise and I shared that coffee shop moment, an hour that I quietly held as sacred, I noticed the difference. Calls from cousins grew shorter. A few old friends from church stopped returning my texts. Lynn hadn't just been silent all those years. She had been strategic. She'd seeded enough doubt in enough ears that now, in this new version of our unraveling, I wasn't just the absent father. I was the unstable one. The manipulator. The one who waited until 60 to start scrambling for affection he hadn't earned. It wasn't said outright, but I heard it in their tone, in the way conversations now tiptoed around any mention of my children, my marriage, or even my birthday, as if any reminder of my life was radioactive. I didn't expect apologies, but I hadn't anticipated exile either. The final straw came at a family gathering, a cousin's engagement party at Lynn's sister's house. I was invited, though something about the invitation felt more like an afterthought. Still, I showed up. I wore the same blue blazer Lynn once complimented me on years ago, before compliments turned into critiques, and then into silence. I told myself I was attending for appearance's sake, to show I wasn't hiding, that I hadn't turned into the villain they were all whispering about. The second I walked in, I felt it. The hush, the pivot of attention, the small but unmistakable ripple of tension. Lynn was already there, standing with a wine glass, laughing with her sister and two other women I'd known for decades. She looked radiant, collected, in control. I tried to stay cordial, mingled where I could, accepted a few nods from people who didn't quite meet my eyes. Then it happened. One of Lynn's nephews, a loudmouth who always thought himself clever, walked up to me with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Heard you've been showing off receipts," he said, voice just loud enough for the small circle around us to hear. "Trying to buy back some hugs, huh?" A few people laughed nervously, unsure if it was a joke or a jab. I didn't flinch. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "I'm not buying anything. I'm just telling the story your aunt never had the courage to tell." The words landed like a slap. His grin dropped. And just like that, the room turned colder. Lynn walked over, her smile already sharpened like a blade. "James," she said, too sweetly, "maybe this isn't the place for your grievances." I took a step back, hands in my pockets to keep them from trembling. "Funny," I replied. "I spent 3 decades funding this family, and no one had a problem discussing that at parties. But now that I want the truth told, it's suddenly bad manners." The crowd shifted uneasily. No one wanted to be in the blast radius. Lynn's eyes narrowed. "This isn't about truth," she snapped. "It's about control. You couldn't control them emotionally, so now you're trying to control the narrative." Her voice trembled just slightly, not from fear, but from the thrill of performance. She was winning again, in front of her audience. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just said, "I'm not trying to control the story. I'm trying to exist in it." Then I turned and left. I didn't say goodbye, didn't look back. I walked to my car, sat in the driver's seat, and let the weight of humiliation settle across my chest like a wet blanket. I wasn't ashamed of the words I said. I was ashamed of how easily I had been erased, and how deeply the people I once trusted were willing to believe a version of me that was convenient for their sympathy. Lynn didn't need to lie dramatically. She had simply curated reality, presented herself as the lone emotional anchor in a sea of emotional neglect. And I, in my quiet sacrifices, had given her all the silence she needed to fill in the blanks. Back at Marcus's place, I recounted everything. He didn't interrupt. He just poured me a glass of bourbon and waited until I finished. "So what now?" he asked. I shook my head. "Now, I stop explaining myself to people who've already decided who I am." He nodded slowly. "Good. Because you'll never win with people who feed off the old version of you. They need you to stay the villain. It makes them feel noble." That night, I finally allowed myself to grieve, not the loss of my marriage, but the loss of a reputation I thought would stand on its own. I had believed for so long that doing the right thing would speak for itself, that being dependable and responsible would earn me a place in the hearts of the people I loved. But in the absence of my voice, Lynn had become the narrator. And now, I was just a footnote, unless I wrote a new story entirely. I started seeing a therapist, an older man named Dr. Rayner, who asked very few questions, but always knew which one to ask when it mattered. On our second session, he said, "It's not uncommon for quiet providers to become emotional phantoms in their families." I laughed bitterly. "Yeah, well, I sure made haunting look easy." He smiled kindly. "You don't have to keep haunting them, James. You're allowed to rebuild, even if they never acknowledge it." Those words echoed in my mind for days. Rebuild. Not reconcile. Not redeem. Just rebuild. That was the moment I realized I didn't need to convince everyone anymore. I just needed to become visible to myself. Elise called again a few days later. She'd talked to Jordan. "He's not ready," she said softly. "But he's listening." Sort of. I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "That's enough," I said. "He doesn't have to come running. I just want him to know I was never running away." She told me she had been rereading my emails, going over the documents I gave her. "It's hard," she admitted. "Hard to hold both stories in your head at once." I told her that's what growing up is, realizing your parents are complicated people who didn't always know how to love you the right way, but still tried in their own broken language. "I want to learn that language," she whispered, "before it's too late." I swallowed the lump in my throat and just said, "So do I." And so, while I had become the new villain in many people's eyes, in the quiet corners of my own heart, I started to become something else. A man who was no longer afraid to be misunderstood. Because the only thing worse than being wrongly judged was living invisible in your own life. Time moved slower after everything came to light, but not in the painful, dragging way I expected. It moved like it finally had weight, like every hour had its own story, every day its own meaning. I no longer woke up with that gnawing need to prove something to anyone. I no longer checked my phone waiting for Jordan to call, or scanned through old messages hoping for hidden affection I had missed the first time. The silence no longer felt like a punishment. It felt like space. Space to finally be a man who wasn't defined by how others saw him, but by what he knew he had done, and who he knew he had always been. I wasn't interested in vindication anymore. Vindication required an audience. I had learned the hard way that the people you love most are sometimes the last ones to recognize your truth, even when it's staring them in the face. I didn't move back into the house. Lynn never asked me to. We didn't divorce immediately. People always assume that kind of fracture needs finality. But we became ghosts who shared a mailing address. And eventually, not even that. She stayed in the house. I stayed gone. She still told her version of things at holidays and church functions. I didn't care to correct her anymore. Not because she was right, but because her story had always been her armor. And people don't drop their armor unless they feel safe. I wasn't going to waste the rest of my life trying to make her feel safe enough to finally tell the truth. I had my journals, my receipts, my memory. I had Elise, who still called me once a week and sometimes twice. I had the little projects I'd always put off, fixing the old bike in Marcus's garage, teaching myself to cook something other than steak and eggs. For the first time in decades, I was living for myself, not just surviving for someone else. One Saturday morning, I met Elise for brunch downtown. She was different now. Softer, maybe. Or maybe I was finally seeing the parts of her that I had never been allowed to witness. She ordered her eggs just like her mother, over medium, a little salt, but she laughed more easily, held my gaze longer, like we had both come out of something bruised but breathing. "I told Jordan you never stopped paying for my therapy," she said, stirring her coffee. He didn't believe me at first. Said it sounded like something a guilty man would say. I smirked. I don't blame him. When guilt's the only story you've been told, the truth feels like manipulation. She nodded. He's still angry. But I think he's starting to wonder if maybe the version of you we grew up with wasn't the whole picture. I sighed and looked out the window. He doesn't have to forgive me. I just want him to look again. To actually look. That same week, I got an email from Jordan. It wasn't long. No apology. No questions. Just, I saw the files Elise showed me. I don't know what to say yet, but I saw them. I sat with that line for a long time. It was the kind of message you don't reply to right away. You let it breathe. You let it settle. Because sometimes the first sign of healing is just someone choosing to see you. I didn't push for more. I didn't flood his inbox with emotion. I simply responded, "Thank you for looking." That was it. For words. But they carried more weight than any of the thousands I tried to use in the past. Because they were clean, honest, free of expectation. For the first time in my relationship with my son, I wasn't trying to perform. I was just present. Lynn and I crossed paths again at a mutual friend's funeral. I hadn't seen her in almost 6 months. She looked older, not in a cruel way, but in that particular way people do when their world has shrunk, when the version of themselves they had spent so long defending starts to crack under its own weight. We exchanged polite words. She said I looked good. I told her she did too. Then she leaned in and said, "You still think I made them hate you, don't you?" I stared at her, not with bitterness, but with something closer to pity. "No," I said. "I think you needed to be the only one they loved. And you got what you needed. But now I'm getting what I needed too, just a little later." She looked down at her hands. "They needed someone to blame," she whispered. "And you were never around to stop them." I nodded. "I know. That's on me. But pretending I was never there? That's on you." We didn't argue after that. There was no blow-up, no final dramatic scene. Just two people who had outgrown the lies that once held them together. I left before the service ended. I didn't need to hear the eulogies. I had spent enough of my life mourning the loss of things still alive. My name, my presence, my legacy. Now I was building something new. Not louder, not flashier, just real. I joined a writing group, started submitting short pieces about fatherhood, invisibility, aging. One of my essays got published online. Under a pseudonym, of course. I wasn't looking for recognition. I just wanted the story to be out there, even if no one knew it was mine. Sometimes, telling the truth isn't about getting it back. Sometimes it's about putting it down, finally, like a heavy bag you've been carrying for far too long. A few months later, Elise brought her daughter, my granddaughter, to visit me. It was the first time I held that little girl. And when she wrapped her fingers around mine, I didn't think about receipts or resentment or years lost to silence. I thought about beginnings. I thought about the kind of grandfather I could be, the kind who shows up, not just with money or support, but with presence. Elise watched me closely, her eyes glistening. "She's going to know you," she said. "Not just the stories, not just the version someone else gives her. She'll know you." And just like that, I felt whole again, not because I had been redeemed, but because I had rebuilt something no one could take away this time. And so, I stood firm, not bitter, not vengeful, just clear. I had loved my family in the only way I knew how. And now, finally, I was learning how to love myself too. If you've ever been erased from your own family's story, or had to claw your way back into it, then you understand the quiet kind of heartbreak this man lived through. It's not always about proving you were right. It's about reclaiming your truth. What would you do if your children believed someone else's version of you? Share your story in the comments below. Let's talk about it. Because sometimes the only way to stop being invisible is to speak up, even if your voice shakes. See you soon in the next story.